The vote was 4-1. That's how they did it. An actual vote with raised hands, like a homeowners association meeting for a home no one in that room owned except me. My daughter's bedroom, her purple walls, her glow-in-the-dark stars, her name spelled out in wooden letters above the window, put to a democratic process. By my in-laws. In my house. On a Tuesday afternoon in October, while I was 40 minutes away closing out a client's estate. I didn't know about the vote until I came home and found my mother-in-law measuring the room with a yellow tape measure. She had a notepad. Welcome to Family Revenge Stories New. The channel where quiet people keep the receipts and family learns that entitlement has a legal definition. If you've ever had someone treat what you built as something they were owed, you're in exactly the right place. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's get into this. I'm a paralegal. Have been for 11 years, the last 6 with an estate planning firm. My entire professional life is documents, reading them, filing them, understanding exactly what every word in them means and, more importantly, what every word left out of them means. I have held the hands of strangers while they cried over wills that didn't say what they expected. I have watched families who shared blood become adversaries over a set of dining room chairs because the paperwork wasn't clear. I have never in 11 years let my paperwork be unclear. My husband Marcus and I bought the house in 2017. A 3-bedroom ranch on just under half an acre, 12 minutes from the elementary school, with a backyard big enough that our daughter Layla could run in circles until she tired herself out. We bought it together, put our signatures on the same line, paid the same closing costs, but the down payment came from my savings account. $42,000 I had accumulated over 7 years of working, first at a dental office doing billing, then at the firm. $42,000 that I had documented meticulously because I always do. Marcus's family had never fully made sense to me, but I'd learned their rhythms. His mother, Renata, was the kind of woman who spoke in declarations. Not questions, declarations. She didn't ask if the holiday dinner was at our house. She announced it. His older sister Dana treated our home like a hotel she'd booked in advance and could upgrade at will. His younger brother Cole had been between situations, housing, jobs, relationships for most of his adult life. And then there was Marcus's father, Gerald, who had spent years promising Cole that the family would figure something out whenever Cole's situations became critical. I had smiled at this. I had hosted the dinners. I had quietly been the one who figured things out. I did not know for a long time that I had been entered into a system of accounts I'd never agreed to open. The October the measuring tape appeared, Layla had just turned 7. She was in 2nd grade, obsessed with horses and chapter books, and she had informed us the previous spring that purple was her color now and always would be. We'd repainted her room in May. 2 coats of lavender, 1 coat of the deeper plum she'd chosen for the accent wall. She had picked out the wooden letters herself from a craft store, standing at the display for 20 minutes before deciding on the color. Her room faced the backyard. Morning light came in at an angle that turned everything gold around 7 a.m. That room was not a room to me. It was the proof that I had built something that held. Marcus had been laid off in August. A restructuring, not a performance issue, though by October the distinction had begun to feel philosophical. Money wasn't critical yet. I was working, our savings were sound, and he had prospects. But Renata had begun calling more frequently, and the calls always circled back to Cole. Cole had lost his apartment in September. His girlfriend situation had also resolved itself, which is how Renata phrased it. He needed somewhere to stay just for a few months, just while he got back on his feet. It was family. What else was family for? I had said we'd discuss it. I should have logged that conversation as Exhibit A. What I did not know was that while I was discussing it, while I was thinking through storage solutions, thinking through how to explain things to Layla, thinking through whether temporary ever stayed temporary with Cole, Renata had already convened a meeting. Not with me. With Marcus, Dana, Gerald, and herself. 4 people. In my house. While I was at work. They voted that Cole would take Layla's room and Layla would move into the small office I used for remote work 2 days a week. The office with no closet. The office that faced the street and got noise from the neighbor's truck at 6 every morning. They had a plan. Cole could pay nominal rent, Layla was only 7 and adaptable, and the office was really more than big enough for a child. The vote was 4-1. Marcus was the one. I came home to Renata measuring the room with her yellow tape measure and her notepad. And I stood in the doorway for a moment and I said, "What are you doing?" And she looked up with the settled expression of someone completing an approved task and said, "Just getting the dimensions, sweetheart. For when Cole moves in." I looked at her notepad. She'd already written down the window measurements. I went into the kitchen, put my bag on the counter, and I pulled out my phone. I took a photograph of the notepad before she closed it. That night, after Renata had gone back to her own home, Marcus sat me down to explain. He used the word decided, plural we, but he meant them. He said it made sense just for a few months, just while Cole found his footing. He said Layla would adjust. He said it wasn't forever. I asked him one question. Whose name is on the deed? He said that wasn't the point. I said, it might become the point. I want to make sure we both understand what the point is. He told me I was being rigid. That was the word he chose. Rigid. I went to the room that was still Layla's. I sat on the edge of her bed, next to the stuffed horse she'd named Clementine, and I looked at the wooden letters above the window. Lele. Pink with gold edges because she'd changed her mind about the color twice. I thought about the fact that 4 people had held a vote in my house. And then I went to the kitchen table with my laptop, and I opened the document I had not looked at in 3 years, and I read every word of it. The deed to our house lists 2 names, mine and Marcus's. But the deed alone was not what I read that night. What I read was the promissory note. When we bought the house, Marcus's parents had offered to contribute $10,000 toward the purchase. A gift, they said. Family helping family. I had drafted the paperwork myself because that is what I do, and what I drafted was not structured as a gift. It was structured as a loan, informal but signed, notarized at the UPS store on a Wednesday afternoon, witnessed by Dana, who did not read what she was signing as carefully as she should have. The note specified $10,000 interest-free, repayable within 60 days of any transfer or sale of the property, or upon demand with 90 days written notice, whichever came first. Gerald and Renata had signed it. Marcus had signed it. I had signed it. I had kept the original in a file labeled Real Property, in the locked drawer of my desk, and I had not thought about it since the day we filed it because I had never needed to. I had not forgotten it existed. I had simply waited the way documents wait. I read it 3 times. Then I read the deed again. Then I sent an email to the senior attorney at my firm, my boss of 6 years, with a subject line that said, hypothetical, homeownership, co-owner consent, occupancy decisions. I attached the deed. I did not attach the promissory note. Not yet. His reply came back at 11:47 p.m. Not a hypothetical at all, is it? Call me in the morning. The weeks that followed had a particular quality of stillness. Renata called twice to discuss Cole's move-in date. Dana texted about whether the office had a window for natural light. Cole himself sent me a message, the first direct message he'd sent me in perhaps 2 years, asking if he could bring a futon or if we had furniture he could use. I did not reply to any of them. I watched Marcus watch his phone. He had begun to understand that my silence was not the silence of someone who had accepted the arrangement. But he had not yet understood what my silence actually was. At a dinner the following Sunday, Renata's house, the whole family, the kind of meal that functions as theater, Gerald raised a glass and talked about family sticking together during hard times. He looked at Marcus when he said it, and he looked at me, and his look said, "This is settled." He talked about the room as though it were already Cole's. He used the word grateful, directing it at me in a way that assumed the gratitude was mine to receive, not his to give. Dana said something about how she thought the office was actually charming and that Layla would love having a room that looked out at the street because kids loved watching cars. I smiled. I served myself more rice. Cole said he was thinking of painting the room, Layla's room, gray. He said it was a very calming color. He looked at me when he said it. I asked him one question. Have you reviewed your rental agreement? He laughed. It's family. We're not doing a rental agreement. I said, okay. And then I excused myself to use the restroom, and I called my boss from outside on the back patio and I said, I need the letters drafted. the notice of demand for the promissory note, and a formal co-owner consent refusal for the occupancy change. I need them by Friday. He said. I'll have them to you Thursday. If you've ever sat at a table where people were carving up something that belonged to you, smiling and passing the bread, you already know what that Sunday dinner felt like. You already know the particular quality of knowing something that no one else in the room knows yet. Stay with me. We're just getting to the part where the paperwork arrives. The letters went out on a Friday. Certified mail, return receipt requested. The first letter, addressed to Gerald and Renata, was the notice of demand on the promissory note. $10,000, per the terms of the signed agreement, repayable within 90 days. The letter cited the date of the note, the notarization, the witness signature, Dana's signature, and attached a copy of the original document. The second letter, addressed to Marcus, was from my boss in his capacity as an attorney, informing him that as co-owner of the property at our address, any decision to allow an additional permanent or semi-permanent occupant required the documented consent of both owners, and that no such consent had been given. The letter noted that any attempt to install an occupant without that consent could constitute a violation of co-owner rights. It noted that a vote among family members held without the co-owner present was not a legally recognized mechanism for property decisions. It also noted, quietly, in the second-to-last paragraph, that the co-owner had not consented, and did not consent. I was home when Marcus received his copy. He read it twice. I watched his face change the way a document changes when you find the clause you missed, slowly, then all at once. He said, "You talk to a lawyer." I said, "I work with lawyers. This is what I do." He said, "This is our family." I said, "This is my house." He said I was being. I said, "Don't say rigid again." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "My parents are going to get a letter saying they owe $10,000. I said, "They owe $10,000. They signed a promissory note. The note has always said they owe $10,000. The letter is simply informing them of something that has been true since 2017. He picked up his phone. I went and sat at the kitchen table. I set down the file that contained the original promissory note, the deed, the attorney letters, the photograph of Renata's notepad with the window measurements, and the screenshot of Cole's text asking about the futon. I set my hands flat on top of the file. I waited. Renata called within the hour. The call came through the landline, the one we kept for emergencies, the number I hadn't given anyone voluntarily in years. I answered. She said there must be a mistake. She said they'd given that money as a gift. She said no one in this family does contracts, that's not how family works. Her voice had the quality of someone who had never, in 62 years, had a piece of paper disagree with her version of events. I told her I could email her a copy of what she'd signed, if she wanted to review it. She said she hadn't read it carefully at the time. I said, "I know." Dana called an hour after that. Her tone was different, sharper, less confused, more accusatory. She used the word vindictive. She said I was using a technicality to punish the family for trying to help Cole. She said Layla would be fine. I did not mention that her own name was on the note as witness. I was saving that. Gerald called Marcus, not me. I could hear Marcus's half of the conversation from the hallway. Gerald said the note wasn't enforceable, that no real court would honor an informal family document. He was incorrect about that. 3 days later, Renata called again to tell me that the family wanted to meet. Sunday. At our house. To talk this through. Her voice had found a new register. Not quite soft, not quite pleading, but something that had decided to try warmth as a strategy. I said of course. I said I'd make coffee. I spent Saturday evening at the kitchen table. I did not make a speech. I made a file. The file contained, in order, a copy of the deed, a copy of the promissory note with all signatures highlighted, the attorney letter about co-owner consent, the photograph of Renata measuring Layla's room, the screenshot of Cole's futon text, Dana's text about the charming office, a printed copy of the relevant property law statute my boss had cited, and at the back, a single folded piece of paper I did not show anyone until the moment I needed it. Sunday came. They arrived together, all 4 of them plus Marcus. They sat in the living room. I made coffee. I set out cups. Layla was at her friend's house. Gerald started. He had notes which surprised me and shouldn't have. He talked about family obligations, about the years they'd supported Marcus, about the $10,000 being understood by everyone as a gift regardless of how the paperwork read. He said the letter from the attorney had been unnecessarily aggressive. He said he hoped we could resolve this like adults, like family. He looked at me when he said, like family. Dana said that Marcus had told her I'd been under a lot of stress at work, and that she understood this was hard. Cole said nothing. He was looking at the floor. I would come back to this. Then Renata said the thing they'd assembled to say. She said they had talked and agreed that moving Layla to the office was simply the most practical solution for everyone, and that they hoped I could see that. She said they loved Layla and would never do anything that wasn't in her best interest. She said the room would only be temporary. She said the word family 4 times in 3 sentences. She finished. She looked at me. I said, "Thank you. Can I respond?" Gerald nodded, the gesture of a man granting an audience. I opened the file. I set the deed on the coffee table. I said, "This is the deed to this property. Both names are on it, Marcus's and mine. The down payment of $42,000 came entirely from my account. I can provide the bank statement if that's relevant." Renata began to say something. I said, "I'm not finished." I set the promissory note on the table. I said, "This is the promissory note signed on March 14, 2017. It specifies $10,000 as a loan, not a gift. It is notarized. It has 3 signatures on it, Gerald's, Renata's, and Marcus's. The witness signature is Dana's." I looked at Dana when I said her name. I watched her look at the paper. I watched the color move. I set the attorney letter on the table. I said, "This is a letter from a licensed attorney who has reviewed the deed and the relevant statutes, confirming that no occupancy decision affecting this property can be made without the consent of both co-owners. I have not consented. I do not consent." Gerald said, "This is absurd." I said, "This is real estate law. They're actually quite different." He said, "We're not paying $10,000. I said, "You signed a document saying you would. You may want to get your own attorney to review it before deciding what you're not doing." Dana said, "You're doing this to punish us." I looked at her. I said, "I'm doing this because 4 people held a vote about my daughter's bedroom in my house while I was at work. I'm simply explaining what belongs to whom." Renata's voice rose. She said I had always had a problem with this family, that I had never truly been a part of it, that I thought I was better than them because of my job. I said, "I don't think that. I do think that documents mean what they say." Cole was still looking at the floor. Marcus was looking at the window. I took the last piece of paper out of the file, the folded one. I unfolded it and set it on the table. It was a letter. 1 page, handwritten, in the slightly cramped cursive of a man who'd had a stroke 3 years prior and wrote slowly now. It was from Gerald's own father, Marcus's grandfather, Bernard, who had died in April, 2 months before the vote about Layla's room. I had found it while helping process Bernard's estate through our firm. It was addressed to no one specifically. It was in his effects. It was not a legal document. It was not part of any will. It was a letter that said, among other things, "I am sorry I always let Renata decide things without asking the ones affected." I watched my son do the same. It never made the family stronger. It just made it quieter. I had read that letter 6 times since April. I had read it the way you read something that names a thing you knew but couldn't say. I set it on the table. I said, "Bernard wrote that in February, 2 months before he died." The room was completely still. Renata looked at the letter and did not pick it up. Gerald looked at Marcus. Marcus was still looking at the window. Cole looked up from the floor for the first time. He looked at the letter and he looked at me, and he said quietly, in a voice no one else in the room seemed to hear the same way I did, "I never asked for the room." I said, "I know." I closed the file. I said, "Layla's room will stay Layla's room. The promissory note will be resolved through our attorneys." And I would like everyone except Marcus to leave my house now. Gerald said one more thing, something about regret about this being a mistake. I said it was. But not mine. I picked up the file and walked into the kitchen. I did not look back. I heard the front door open and close. The promissory note was settled 4 months later. Gerald and Renata paid $8,000 in a lump sum and we forgave the remaining $2,000 in writing, which I documented because I document everything. The agreement was drafted by my boss, signed by all parties, notarized and filed. Dana sent me a single text message the following spring. It said, "I didn't know what I was signing." I read it twice. I did not respond. I don't know what response would have been accurate. Gerald stopped calling Marcus about family meetings. The calls still happened. Marcus's family continued as families do, but the shape of them changed. Gerald had a new quality in his voice when Marcus mentioned my name. Caution has its own sound. Cole found an apartment in February. He texted me once, separately from the family thread, to say congratulations on a promotion I had mentioned to Marcus in passing. It was a strange text. I think it was the closest he knew how to come to saying something he didn't have the words for. I texted back, "Thank you. I meant it." Marcus and I went to couples counseling. I will not script that part of this story. It is not finished yet, and the parts of it that are finished belong only to us. What I will say is that the word rigid has not been used in our house since October. Bernard's letter lives in the file. The same file. It sits behind the promissory note and the deed and the attorney letters in the correct order last, which means it's the first thing you see when you open the file from the back. I've thought about framing it. I haven't. It belongs with the documents. That's where it makes sense. With part of the settled money, my half of the $8,000 after legal fees, I bought Layla a proper bookshelf for her room. The tall kind with adjustable shelves, in the white that matched her desk. She picked out new bookends, 2 golden horses. She doesn't know any of this happened. She went back to her room on the afternoon the family left, and she lay on her bed reading a chapter book about a girl who trained wild horses, and the morning light came in at the angle that turns everything gold around 7 a.m., and Layla is still hung above the window in pink with gold edges. Because she had changed her mind about the color twice and I had let her. My family spent years operating on the assumption that my calm was the same as my consent. They treated my steadiness as a resource, something they could draw on without ever asking whether the account was open, whether the terms had been agreed to, whether any of it had ever been offered freely. They were wrong about what calm is. Calm is not accommodation. Calm is simply what patience looks like from the outside when the paperwork is already in order. If this story reminded you that what you built is yours, that quiet doesn't mean available, that a document signed in 2017 waits exactly as long as it needs to, take that with you. Check your own files. Read your own agreements. Know what your name on a deed actually means, and what other people's names on your documents mean too. Drop a comment telling me which part sat with you the longest. Hit subscribe if you believe that dignity doesn't require an audience, only evidence. I'll see you in the next one.